Perhaps of all the tools one will make use of in oral narration, the voice is the primary means by which your performance is going to be based on. Technically, vocals, or vocalics, are actually understood to be a part of the nonverbal communication category. But due to their prominent role in narration performance, we are going to conduct a lecture specifically on vocalics. So, in this brief lecture we will cover a general overview of vocalics and the 9 main categories under vocalics. To begin, let us first define what we mean by vocalics. It is defined as a non-verbal category under communication which focuses on vocal fluctuations, and most often accompanies verbal communication, though not always. The difference between vocalics as a non-verbal style and verbal communication has to do with actual words. When we speak of verbal communication, we are referring specifically to the words and the actual message which is spoken by the person delivering. Vocalics are the specific use of your vocal cords, with or without actual words. How you use vocalics within verbal communication will affect the meaning and understanding of what you are saying. However, you can use vocalics without actual words in order to communicate messages as well. For example, if someone has annoyed me while they speak, and I communicate a loud sigh, this would communicate annoyance although I have not used any actual words. In oral narration you use many forms of vocalics in order to bring your performance alive. Your whole performance relies on it. How one decides to use their vocalics is determined on the subject, content, ability, and the personality or personalities you are performing. It is important to practice with the narration pieces you have chosen to determine the best approach when using vocalics. As you practice the use of your vocal cords, it will aid you in developing confidence, appropriateness of volume and pacing, and the areas you are skilled in and need work on. Now that we have a basic understanding of vocalics, let us go under the main categories to gain a better understanding. Vocalics can be divided into the following subdivisions: vocal quality, volume, pitch, rate, pauses, vocal variety, pronunciation, enunciation, and articulation. Some of these overlap in characteristics, but let us look at them each individually to gain a better understanding. First, we have the vocal quality, otherwise known as the timbre or texture. This characteristic describes the overall quality of your voice and is often related to your range and pitch. For example, some people have what we would call a warm voice, such as a mother speaking to a baby. Some others may have a very sharp and clear voice, which can sometimes be heard whether the voice is low or high. There are others who may have the opposite and use a scratchy or rough voice. A notable example of this would be the famed musician Tom Waits. In performances you will shift and alter the quality of your voice based on the persona or characters you are portraying. Second, we have volume, which is the loudness or softness of one's voice. This is often associated with the power which your voice is projected. The volume of your voice influences the perception you are trying to portray regarding your narration. The lowering and raising of your voice in a performance can communicate a number of things such as comedy, fear, anxiety, and so on. The volume is also influenced by where you are performing. For example, if you are on stage, you will project your voice differently in volume than if you were presenting in a classroom. It is important that you choose the appropriate volume for your context and your content. Third, we have pitch, otherwise known as intonation. This characteristic deals with the highness and lowness of your voice and refers to the range of your voice, known as tone. Pitch deals with the frequency of your voice when performing and influences how one conveys meaning of a word or message. This differs from volume in that one can have a high pitch but low volume, or perhaps a low pitch and a high volume. For example, a dog whistle has a high pitch but a low volume. This is due to the frequency of the sound. Fourth, we have the rate or tempo of vocalics. This element refers to the speed at which one speaks, and influences the rhythm at which you speak. When performing you can use rate to portray different characters, but you should always make sure it is able to be understood. An example of rate and tempo can be observed in the old cartoons of Winnie the Pooh. Anyone familiar with Piglet knows he speaks extremely fast and portrays a constant state of anxiety. In contrast, Eeyore has an extremely slow rate of speech which is often used to portray a melancholy personality. Fifth, are the use of pauses, or momentary breaks in the delivery and performance. Pauses can be very effective in a performance if used correctly, but also very distracting if used poorly or done by mistake. Pauses can be used to help modulate the rate of your performance, and are usually used as a means to draw attention to a specific part of a message. The time span of the pauses can communicate different meanings based on the narrative you are performing. It can be used to make the audience think about content, or it can be used to cause the audience to react in joy or sorrow. For example, if anyone has ever seen the movie The Notebook, they will be familiar with a scene in which Noah asks Allie several times what she wants, as she has to decide if she wants to spend her life with him. Allie does not answer right away and pauses, which is used for dramatic effect upon the audience as they wait to hear her answer. Sixth, we have vocal variety, which is also known as dialect. Vocal varieties deal with a person's shift in rate, pitch, and volume, which generally give a person's voice its variety and expression. It can be distinguished by variations in a person's accent, as well as their grammar and vocabulary. For example, in the United States we generally have 4 main dialects or vocal varieties. We have West Coast, East Coast, Southern, and Midwest dialects. If you were to listen to vocal varieties in the South, you would most likely notice what is called the Southern drawl. In the Midwest you would notice in many of their own grammatical constructions they add an S to their words. For example, "Alls he wants is a nap." If you were to listen to those from the East Coast or New England, you would notice a great rise in their volume as well as their strong accent. Many think it comes across as rude, when in reality it is just the vocal variety of that region. Then there is West Coast, which many find to be a little slower in rate and often nasally. In performances you may use several vocal varieties as a means to make distinctions between characters. Seventh, we have pronunciation, which is the accepted standard of a people's sound and rhythm for words. In other words, it is the way we say things in their entirety. 8. There is enunciation, which is the pronunciation of individual sounds within the words. For example, how we enunciate vowels and consonants in order to emphasize syllables. And lastly, there is articulation, which overlaps with pronunciation and enunciation. This is the physical production of particular vocal sounds, vowels, consonants, and how well they are formed. For example, saying otter versus ought to. In performance it is important to understand the subtle distinctions between these many characteristics in order for you to use them in the most effective way possible. Much of how you use your vocalics will be determined by the narrative piece as well as the characters and audience members, so there is not set rules or concrete guidelines as to how one is supposed to use vocalics. Also, keep in mind that vocalics is part of your non-verbal communication, and must also coincide with your body language, which we will cover in another lecture. Be sure to try out different approaches when practicing your narrative pieces to determine what will be most effective for your audience. And with that we will conclude our lecture over vocalics. Remember, it plays a significant role in your overall performance and needs to be used effectively and appropriately. Be sure to understand the many categories of vocalics and become familiar with the best way to incorporate them into your performance. As you engage with more of these elements in your practice performances, you will discover what works best for your own delivery.